Before you box up another old family item for the donation pile, watch this. Some ordinary-looking heirlooms tucked away in attics, hutches, and dresser drawers have quietly sold for thousands of dollars, and sometimes far more. The strange part is that most owners never realized what they had until it was already gone, sold in a garage sale for a few dollars, or handed off to a stranger who knew exactly what they were looking at. Today, we're counting down 10 vintage heirlooms that could be worth a small fortune. And number one is sitting in more homes than almost anyone expects. Stick around to the end, because the last item on this list is so common that you may be looking right at one without even realizing it. Number 10. Sterling silver flatware sets. I start here because these sets are the ones most families already own, and the ones almost everyone underestimates. A full setting of sterling silver flatware made before the 1950s, especially from respected makers, can weigh far more than modern stainless pieces, and that weight is not a coincidence. Sterling contains real silver content, and beyond the melt value, complete sets in discontinued or hand-engraved patterns regularly bring anywhere from a few $100s to well over $2,000 for a full service. Most people see a heavy old set of forks and spoons and assume it belongs in a drawer until a special occasion, never realizing that pattern rarity and completeness are exactly what serious silver buyers are hunting for. A set that still has its original chest, its matching serving pieces, and no monogram removal or replating, tells a buyer the family cared for it properly across generations. When the hallmarks are still crisp and the handles haven't been worn thin from decades of polishing, a set moves from the good silver to something collectors will pay a genuine premium to acquire. Even individual serving pieces matter here. A pierced pie server, an unusual berry spoon, or an oddly shaped fish knife that doesn't match the rest of the set can sometimes carry more value on its own than an entire dozen of matching forks, simply because odd serving pieces were made in far smaller numbers. Most families never separate these out, tossing them into the same drawer as everyday flatware, which means a genuinely rare piece often gets used to stir coffee for years before anyone notices what it actually is. Number 9. Hand-stitched antique quilts. Quilts made before 1950, especially those pieced entirely by hand from feed sacks, cotton scraps, or wool remnants, are often folded at the bottom of a cedar chest and treated as nothing more than a warm blanket for guests. In reality, museum-quality examples with tight, even stitching and rare regional patterns can sell for anywhere from $200 to several $1,000s, depending on age, pattern complexity, and condition. The stitches themselves tell the story. Machine work spreads out evenly and mechanically, while hand quilting shows the small human irregularities that collectors specifically look for as proof of authenticity. Most owners never turn a quilt over to examine the backing fabric or count the stitches per inch, and that single oversight is often the difference between selling a quilt for $20 at a yard sale and finding out later it belonged in a folk art auction. When the fabric hasn't been bleached, the batting is original, and the pattern is a documented regional design. A quilt stops being bedding and becomes textile history. The story behind a quilt can add real value too, but only when it can actually be documented. A quilt with a known maker, a recorded date, or a family history that can be traced through letters or a signed corner block often outsells an identical unmarked example by a wide margin. Many families have exactly this kind of provenance sitting in an old letter or a note pinned inside the folds, and they simply never think to look for it before deciding a quilt is just an old blanket. Number 8. Griswold and Wagner cast iron cookware. The heavy skillets, Dutch ovens, and cornbread pans stamped with these two names from the late 1800s through the mid-1900s look, to most people, like the same black cast iron sold at any hardware store today. They are not. Certain rare pan sizes, unusual logo styles, and early production markings have turned ordinary-looking cookware into pieces that sell for hundreds and, in rare cases, well over $1,000. Collectors examine the underside of the pan first, checking for specific logo variations, heat rings, and casting numbers that reveal exactly when and where a piece was made. Most families who inherit a box of old cast iron skillets simply keep using them for cooking, never flipping them over to check the maker's mark, and never realizing that a certain rare size in excellent condition is worth more than the rest of the box combined. When the surface is smooth, the handle is unbroken, and the markings are sharp rather than worn flat from decades of scrubbing, a plain black skillet becomes something serious cookware collectors will drive across state lines to buy. Size is often the deciding factor. The most common pan sizes were produced by the millions and remain easy to find at almost any price, while a handful of unusual sizes were made in far smaller runs before being discontinued. And it is precisely those odd numbers stamped into the handle that experienced collectors search for first. A family that inherits a full stacked set of skillets in graduated sizes may be sitting on one rare piece hiding in plain sight among a dozen ordinary ones. Number 7. Depression glass and early Pyrex patterns. The colored glass dishes made during the 1920s through the 1940s, along with the earliest hand-painted Pyrex mixing bowl sets from the 1950s, were mass-produced and inexpensive when new, which is exactly why most people assume they still are. Certain discontinued colors, rare patterns, and limited-run Pyrex designs have quietly become some of the most searched items in vintage kitchenware, with complete nesting bowl sets and rare glass patterns selling for $200 to over $1,000. Most owners see a stack of colorful bowls from grandmother's kitchen and think nothing more of it, never checking whether the pattern printed on the side was a widely produced design or one pulled from production after a single year. Condition matters immensely here. Chips, scratches from decades of stacking, and faded paint pull the value down fast, while a set that was rarely used and carefully stored can bring in serious money from collectors chasing a complete, unblemished run. Completeness carries its own separate premium as well. A full nesting set of 4 graduated mixing bowls in a rare pattern is worth dramatically more than the same 4 bowls sold individually. Because most surviving sets today are missing at least one size after decades of daily use. A family that still has all 4 bowls in their original graduated sizes with no substitutions from a later pattern is holding something genuinely harder to find than most people realize. Number 6. Tintypes and early cabinet card photographs. The small metal-backed photographs and stiff cardboard portrait cards tucked into old family albums from the 1860s through the early 1900s are often dismissed as faded curiosities nobody can identify anymore. But identified images of notable subjects, occupational portraits showing a trade or uniform, and rare early photographic processes can sell for anywhere from $50 to several thousand, depending on subject matter and rarity. Most families flip past these images, looking for more recent, recognizable relatives, never realizing that an unidentified tintype of a soldier, a tradesman, or a subject with visible identifying details is exactly what specialized photography collectors are searching for. The photographer's studio, stamp on the back, the clarity of the image, and any handwritten identification can turn a mystery photograph into a documented piece of history. When the image is sharp, the case or mount is original, and the subject can be tied to a place or event, an old photograph becomes far more than a forgotten face in an album. Occupational images are especially prized in this category. A tintype showing a subject holding the tools of a specific trade, wearing a recognizable uniform, or posed beside identifiable equipment, tells a story that a plain portrait never can, and collectors who focus on social or labor history will pay well beyond the price of a standard portrait for that added layer of documented detail. Number 5. Vintage fountain pens. The fountain pens that once sat in a father's or grandfather's desk drawer, often with gold nibs and celluloid bodies from the 1920s through the 1950s, are frequently mistaken for outdated writing tools nobody wants anymore. Certain limited production models and discontinued colors from well-known makers regularly sell for $100 to well over $1,000, and rare limited editions have brought in far more at specialty auctions. Most people who find an old fountain pen check only whether it still writes, never realizing that the nib material, the filling mechanism, and the specific color of the celluloid body are what separate an ordinary pen from a genuinely valuable one. Hairline cracks in the barrel, a replaced nib, or a non-matching clip can quietly cut the value in half. But a pen that still has its original box, its matching pencil, and no cracks in the body is the kind of complete set that dedicated pen collectors will pay a real premium to add to their collection. Limited production colors are where the real surprises happen. Certain marbled or striped celluloid patterns were produced for only a single year before being discontinued, and a pen in one of those rarer colors can be worth several times more than the exact same model in a more common black or maroon finish, even though the two pens are otherwise identical in every mechanical way. Before we go further, I want to share something I have learned after years of watching people clear out family homes. The most costly mistake is almost always the same one. Assuming an item's story is more important than its condition and its markings. I have seen genuinely valuable pieces sold for pennies because nobody turned them over to check for a stamp, and I have seen ordinary items nearly mistaken for treasures because a seller got swept up in family sentiment. That is exactly why I put together a complete identification guide covering the markings, the condition indicators, and the valuation principles that professional appraisers rely on every day. So you can recognize what you actually have before someone else figures it out for you. Whether you are clearing out an estate, sorting through an attic, or simply curious about what has been sitting in your own home all along, this guide will change the way you look at every item you pick up. You can get it right now using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Number 4. Antique pocket watches. The heavy gold-filled or solid gold pocket watches, once carried by working men through the late 1800s and early 1900s, are frequently found in a drawer, no longer running, and assumed to be worth only their weight in scrap gold. In reality, certain movements from respected watchmakers, particularly railroad-grade watches built to strict accuracy standards, can sell for anywhere from $200 to several $1,000s depending on the maker, the case material, and whether the movement still runs. Most owners never open the case back to check the movement's serial number or examine the jewel count, both of which tell a collector exactly what grade of watch they are holding. A cracked crystal, a replaced case, or a non-original dial can pull the value down significantly. But a watch that still has its matching case, its original dial, and a movement in running or easily serviceable condition becomes the kind of piece that watch collectors actively track down at auction, rather than something to melt down for its gold content. Railroad-grade watches deserve special attention here because they were built under strict industry standards for accuracy, with a minimum jewel count and specific temperature tolerances that separated them from ordinary pocket watches of the same era. A family that owns one of these without realizing it is often looking at a piece worth many times more than a similar-looking watch built for everyday use rather than railway service. Number 3. Fine bone china and figurine sets. The delicate china tea sets and porcelain figurines that once sat behind glass in a formal dining room often produced by respected European and American makers from the early to mid 1900s.